Welcome back to Drowsy Tales Daily. Tonight I have 35 incredible stories from Reddit about rental property nightmares where landlords, tenants, and property managers engaged in shocking betrayals and illegal schemes that destroyed trust and turned housing into warfare zones that will leave you amazed at the lengths people will go to exploit the rental market. Our first story comes from a tenant who discovered their landlord had been secretly living in the attic space above their apartment for several months while collecting rent and maintaining the illusion of being an absent property owner who lived elsewhere. The landlord had been experiencing financial difficulties and had lost their own residence but had decided to secretly occupy rental property while continuing to collect rent from unsuspecting tenants who believed they had privacy and exclusive use of the rental unit. The secret attic living scheme involved sophisticated concealment and timing that would allow covert residence while avoiding detection through normal tenant activities and property usage that should have provided privacy and exclusive occupancy according to lease agreements and rental arrangements. The landlord had been particularly careful to limit attic access and movement to periods when tenants were away from the apartment, using detailed knowledge of tenant schedules and activities to maintain secret residence without arousing suspicion about noise or unusual activity in supposedly unoccupied attic space. The scheme extended to manipulating property maintenance and inspection schedules to ensure that secret attic residents would remain hidden during any property visits or maintenance activities that might expose unauthorized occupancy and lease violation that was occurring without tenant knowledge or consent. The landlord had also been monitoring tenant communications and activities through unauthorized access to rental unit, essentially conducting surveillance while secretly residing in the same property and violating tenant privacy rights and lease obligations. The secret attic residence was discovered when tenants heard unusual noises and investigated attic access, finding clear evidence of ongoing occupancy and personal belongings that revealed their landlord had been secretly living above their apartment while collecting rent and violating lease privacy expectations and exclusive occupancy rights. Our second story involves a property management company employee who was systematically stealing rent payments from multiple tenants while creating false records and documentation that would conceal ongoing theft and maintain the appearance of normal rent collection and property management services. The property manager had been intercepting rent payments and depositing funds into personal accounts while creating fake payment records and tenant communications that would explain missing rent payments through supposedly delinquent tenants and collection problems that allegedly required ongoing management attention and intervention. The rent payment theft scheme involved sophisticated manipulation of payment processing and record keeping that would allow systematic theft while maintaining property management credibility and avoiding detection through normal landlord oversight and financial monitoring that should have identified missing rental income and payment discrepancies. The manager had been particularly focused on targeting properties with absent landlords and automated payment systems where theft would be less likely to be immediately detected through direct landlord-tenant communication and payment verification that might expose missing funds and fraudulent payment records. The scheme extended to manipulating tenant communications and creating false delinquency reports that would justify eviction proceedings against tenants who had actually paid rent that was stolen rather than forwarded to property owners according to management agreements and payment processing obligations. The manager had also been creating false maintenance and operational expense reports that would explain missing funds while actually stealing rental income that belonged to property owners who trusted management company services for honest rent collection and property oversight. The rent payment theft was discovered when multiple tenants received eviction notices for supposedly unpaid rent despite having payment records and receipts, leading to investigation that revealed systematic theft of rent payments and fraudulent management practices that had been stealing property income while creating false delinquency problems. Our third story comes from a building resident who discovered their neighbor was illegally subletting an apartment they didn't own while impersonating the actual tenant and collecting rent from unsuspecting subletters who believed they were entering legitimate rental arrangements. The neighbor had gained unauthorized access to a vacant apartment and had been conducting illegal subletting operations while creating false documentation and lease agreements that would appear to provide legitimate rental opportunities for individuals seeking housing arrangements. The illegal subletting scheme involved sophisticated impersonation and document fraud that would allow rental income generation from property that didn't belong to the person conducting subletting operations, essentially operating a rental business using stolen property access and fraudulent tenant identity claims. The neighbor had been particularly focused on targeting desperate housing seekers who would be willing to pay advance deposits and rent payments without thorough verification of rental legitimacy and property ownership that might expose the unauthorized nature of subletting operations and fraudulent rental arrangements. The scheme extended to creating fake rental advertisements and property management claims that would attract potential subletters while avoiding detection through legitimate property management oversight and owner communication that would reveal unauthorized subletting and tenant impersonation activities. The neighbor had also been manipulating building access and security systems to maintain unauthorized apartment access, while conducting illegal rental operations that violated property ownership rights and created liability issues for legitimate property owners and building management. The illegal subletting operation was discovered when actual property owners attempted to show the apartment to legitimate prospective tenants and found unauthorized occupants who had been paying rent to someone who had no legal right to sublet the property or collect rental payments. Our fourth story involves a landlord who was systematically installing hidden surveillance cameras in private areas of rental apartments while claiming that security equipment was necessary for property protection and maintenance monitoring that supposedly justified unauthorized surveillance and privacy violations. The landlord had been motivated by control issues and voyeuristic behavior that violated tenant privacy rights and legal boundaries while using property ownership as justification for surveillance activities that were actually illegal invasion of privacy and unauthorized monitoring of tenant activities. The hidden camera installation scheme involved sophisticated surveillance equipment placement and concealment that would allow ongoing monitoring while avoiding detection through normal apartment usage and tenant activities that should have provided privacy and freedom from unauthorized surveillance and rental housing. The landlord had been particularly focused on installing cameras in private areas, including bathrooms and bedrooms, where surveillance would constitute serious privacy violations and potential criminal activity, while maintaining enough legitimate security equipment to provide cover for unauthorized surveillance installations. The scheme extended to using surveillance footage for personal entertainment and potential blackmail opportunities while violating fundamental tenant rights and legal protections that should have prevented unauthorized monitoring and privacy invasion in rental properties. The landlord had also been accessing apartments without proper notice to install and maintain surveillance equipment while claiming maintenance responsibilities that supposedly justified unauthorized entry and privacy violations that actually constituted criminal trespassing and surveillance abuse. The hidden camera scheme was discovered when tenants found surveillance equipment during apartment cleaning, and investigation revealed systematic privacy violations and unauthorized monitoring that constituted serious legal violations and criminal invasion of privacy. Our fifth story comes from a property owner who discovered their tenant was operating an illegal drug manufacturing laboratory in the basement while maintaining normal residential appearance and rental obligations that concealed ongoing criminal activity and property contamination that created serious health and safety hazards. The tenant had been using rental property for drug production while creating false explanations for unusual chemical odors and activity that would conceal manufacturing operations while maintaining enough normal residential behavior to avoid immediate detection through landlord oversight and neighbor observation. The illegal drug lab operation involved sophisticated concealment and chemical handling that created serious contamination and safety hazards while violating lease terms and criminal laws that prohibited illegal drug manufacturing in residential properties that were supposed to be used for legitimate housing purposes. The tenant had been particularly focused on maintaining rental payment and lease compliance to avoid landlord attention while conducting criminal manufacturing operations that created property damage and contamination requiring expensive remediation and safety cleanup procedures. The scheme extended to manipulating property ventilation and waste disposal to conceal chemical evidence while creating environmental hazards and property contamination that would require extensive cleanup and potential property condemnation due to drug manufacturing residue and chemical contamination. The tenant had also been threatening other building residents and neighbors to prevent reporting of suspicious activity while maintaining enough residential appearance to avoid immediate law enforcement attention and criminal investigation that might expose drug manufacturing operations. The illegal drug lab was discovered when chemical odors and equipment became obvious to neighbors, and property inspection revealed extensive contamination and manufacturing equipment that required immediate evacuation and hazardous material cleanup procedures. Our sixth story involves a property owner who was systematically renting the same apartment to multiple tenants while collecting deposits and advance rent payments from each person and creating false availability schedules that would delay discovery of multiple rental arrangements for identical housing units. The property owner had been operating a rental fraud scheme where the same apartment would be promised to multiple tenants with different move-in dates, while collecting substantial deposits and advance payments from each person without any intention of providing actual housing accommodations. The multiple tenant scheme involved sophisticated scheduling manipulation and false communication that would prevent tenants from discovering that identical apartments had been rented to multiple people while maintaining enough rental process appearance to continue collecting deposits and payments from additional victims. The owner had been particularly focused on targeting desperate housing seekers who would be willing to pay substantial deposits and advance rent for apartments in competitive rental markets where housing scarcity would create urgency and reduce verification of rental legitimacy and availability claims. The scheme extended to creating false lease documents and rental agreements that would appear legitimate while actually representing fraudulent rental promises that could never be fulfilled due to multiple conflicting rental arrangements for identical apartment units. The owner had also been manipulating showing schedules and property access to ensure that multiple tenants wouldn't encounter each other during apartment viewing and lease signing processes that would expose the fraudulent multiple rental arrangements and deposit collection scheme. The multiple tenant fraud was discovered when several people arrived on the same move-in date with keys and lease agreements for the same apartment, leading to investigation that revealed systematic rental fraud and deposit theft that had been operating across multiple properties and apartment units. Our seventh story comes from tenants who discovered their building maintenance worker was systematically stealing from apartments during repair visits while using legitimate maintenance access to conduct theft operations and property searches for valuable items that could be removed without immediate detection. The maintenance worker had been using repair appointments and emergency maintenance calls as opportunities to survey apartment contents and steal valuable items, while maintaining normal maintenance responsibilities and building access that provided cover for theft operations and unauthorized property removal. The apartment theft scheme involved sophisticated timing and concealment that would allow systematic stealing while avoiding immediate detection through normal tenant activities and property usage that wouldn't immediately reveal missing items until after maintenance visits had concluded and worker access had ended. The worker had been particularly focused on stealing items that wouldn't be immediately missed while conducting legitimate maintenance work that provided justifiable presence in apartments and access to personal property that should have been protected during routine building maintenance and repair services. The scheme extended to recruiting accomplices among building staff and service providers who could help identify valuable items and provide additional access opportunities while sharing proceeds from stolen property and coordinated theft operations that exploited building maintenance and service provider access. The worker had also been creating false maintenance reports and repair documentation that would justify extended apartment access while actually conducting theft operations that had nothing to do with legitimate building maintenance and repair responsibilities. The maintenance theft operation was discovered when multiple tenants noticed valuable items missing after maintenance visits, and investigation revealed systematic theft by building maintenance staff who had been exploiting their access privileges to conduct ongoing property theft operations. Our eighth story involves a landlord who was systematically shutting off utilities and essential services to force tenant eviction while claiming that utility problems and service interruptions were due to building maintenance and infrastructure issues that supposedly justified service disruption and tenant inconvenience. The landlord had been attempting to force tenant departure without following legal eviction procedures by creating living conditions that would be so uncomfortable that tenants would voluntarily abandon rental units rather than endure ongoing utility problems and service interruptions. The utility shutoff scheme involved deliberate service disruption and infrastructure sabotage while creating false explanations for utility problems that would avoid legal liability for illegal eviction tactics and tenant harassment that violated rental laws and tenant protection rights. The landlord had been particularly focused on targeting tenants with lease protections and rent control benefits where legal eviction would be difficult or expensive, while illegal harassment and utility manipulation would create pressure for voluntary departure without formal eviction proceedings. The scheme extended to manipulating building systems and creating false maintenance emergencies that would justify service interruptions while actually conducting illegal eviction tactics and tenant harassment that violated laws protecting tenant rights and housing stability. The landlord had also been refusing to repair utility problems and building systems while claiming financial constraints that supposedly justified ongoing service problems and tenant inconvenience that actually represented deliberate harassment and illegal eviction pressure. The utility shutoff harassment was discovered when multiple tenants documented systematic service disruptions, and legal investigation revealed deliberate utility manipulation and illegal eviction tactics that violated tenant protection laws and harassment statutes. Our ninth story comes from a tenant who discovered their roommate was secretly subletting rooms and apartment space to unauthorized occupants while collecting rent payments and creating overcrowding and safety issues that violated lease terms and building occupancy regulations. The roommate had been operating unauthorized subletting operations while concealing additional occupants from primary tenants and landlords who were unaware of lease violations and unauthorized rental income generation that was occurring within the apartment unit. The unauthorized subletting scheme involved sophisticated concealment and occupancy management that would allow additional tenants while avoiding detection through normal apartment usage and landlord oversight that should have identified lease violations and unauthorized occupancy that exceeded apartment capacity and safety regulations. The roommate had been particularly focused on maximizing rental income through unauthorized subletting while maintaining enough normal apartment appearance to avoid immediate detection of occupancy violations and lease term breaches that could result in eviction and lease termination for all apartment residents. The scheme extended to creating false explanations for increased utility usage and apartment, where while actually supporting additional unauthorized occupants who were creating overcrowding and safety hazards that violated building regulations and lease occupancy limits. The roommate had also been collecting security deposits and rental payments from unauthorized subtenants while providing no legal protection or legitimate rental arrangements that would protect occupant rights or provide housing security for individuals paying for apartment access. The unauthorized subletting operation was discovered when landlord inspection revealed obvious signs of overcrowding and unauthorized occupancy that exceeded lease terms and building safety regulations, leading to investigation that revealed systematic subletting fraud and lease violation that threatened all tenants' housing security. Our 10th story involves a property management company that was systematically embezzling security deposits from multiple rental properties while creating false damage claims and repair documentation that would justify keeping deposits and avoiding refund obligations to departing tenants. The management company had been operating a systematic deposit theft scheme, where security deposits would be retained regardless of apartment condition through fabricated damage claims and inflated repair costs that would consume entire deposit amounts while providing minimal actual repairs or property improvements. The security deposit embezzlement involved sophisticated false documentation and repair manipulation that would justify deposit retention while avoiding legal liability for wrongful deposit withholding and tenant rights violations that should have protected deposit refunds and security payment returns. The company had been particularly focused on targeting short-term tenants and transient residents who would be less likely to pursue legal action for deposit recovery, while maximizing deposit retention through false damage claims and repair cost inflation that violated tenant protection laws and security deposit regulations. The scheme extended to creating relationships with corrupt contractors and repair services who would provide inflated estimates and false repair documentation that would support deposit theft while actually providing minimal property improvements and maintenance services that didn't justify deposit retention costs and repair charges. The company had also been manipulating move-out inspections and property condition assessments to create false damage claims that would justify deposit retention while actually representing normal wear and tear that should not have resulted in deposit forfeiture and security payment loss. The security deposit embezzlement was discovered when multiple former tenants compared deposit retention experiences and legal investigation revealed systematic theft and false damage claims that violated tenant protection laws and security deposit regulations. Our 11th story comes from a tenant who discovered their landlord was regularly entering their apartment without permission to steal personal belongings while using master key access and false maintenance claims to justify unauthorized entry and property theft that violated tenant privacy rights and rental agreements. The landlord had been systematically stealing valuable items during unauthorized apartment entries, while creating false maintenance and inspection explanations that would provide cover for theft operations and unauthorized access to tenant personal property and private living spaces. The landlord theft scheme involved sophisticated timing and concealment that would allow ongoing stealing while avoiding immediate detection through normal tenant activities and property usage that wouldn't immediately reveal missing items until after unauthorized entries had concluded and landlord access had ended. The landlord had been particularly focused on stealing items that could be easily sold or pawned while maintaining enough legitimate property management activity to provide cover for unauthorized apartment access and tenant property theft that violated fundamental rental agreements and privacy protections. The scheme extended to monitoring tenant schedules and absence patterns to ensure that apartment entries would occur when tenants were away and theft activities would be unlikely to be discovered during actual stealing operations and property removal activities. The landlord had also been creating false keys and access methods that would allow unauthorized entry while maintaining plausible deniability about apartment access and property theft that should have been prevented through tenant privacy rights and rental agreement protections. The landlord theft operation was discovered when tenants installed security cameras and documented unauthorized entries and property theft that revealed systematic stealing and privacy violations that constituted serious criminal activity and rental agreement breaches. Our 12th story involves a tenant who systematically destroyed rental property before moving out as revenge for landlord disputes while creating maximum property damage and repair costs that would far exceed security deposits and create substantial financial liability for property owners. The tenant had been involved in ongoing conflicts with property management and had decided to use property destruction as retaliation while timing damage to coincide with lease termination when discovery would occur too late for prevention or immediate intervention by property owners and management. The revenge property destruction involved systematic damage to apartment systems and structures while creating maximum repair costs and property restoration requirements that would punish landlords through expensive damage that went far beyond normal wear and tear expectations and security deposit coverage. The tenant had been particularly focused on creating damage that would be expensive to repair while avoiding criminal liability through destruction techniques that might appear to be accidental or caused by normal usage rather than deliberate property sabotage and revenge destruction. The scheme extended to recruiting accomplices and using specialized knowledge about building systems to create maximum damage while concealing evidence of deliberate destruction that could result in criminal charges and civil liability for property destruction and vandalism. The tenant had also been timing destruction activities to coincide with final lease periods when property inspection and damage assessment would be delayed until after tenant departure and property abandonment had occurred. The revenge property destruction was discovered during move-out inspection when extensive damage became obvious and investigation revealed systematic property destruction and sabotage that far exceeded normal tenant damage and required extensive repair and restoration work. Our 13th story comes from prospective tenants who discovered a real estate agent was collecting rental application deposits for apartments that didn't exist while operating fake rental advertisements and property showings that were designed to steal application fees and security deposits from housing seekers. The agent had been creating false rental listings and property advertisements while collecting substantial application fees and deposits from multiple prospective tenants who believed they were applying for legitimate rental opportunities and housing arrangements. The fake rental scheme involved sophisticated property fraud and false advertising that would attract desperate housing seekers while collecting advance payments for apartments that were either already rented, didn't exist, or weren't actually available for rental through the agent's services and property management claims. The agent had been particularly focused on targeting competitive rental markets, where housing scarcity would create urgency and reduce verification of rental legitimacy and property availability that might expose fraudulent listings and false rental opportunities. The scheme extended to creating fake property showings and apartment tours that would convince prospective tenants of rental legitimacy while actually showing properties that weren't available for rent or that the agent had no authority to lease or manage according to property ownership and rental agreements. The agent had also been manipulating application processes and deposit collection to maximize theft from each prospective tenant while avoiding immediate detection of rental fraud and false property representation that violated real estate regulations and consumer protection laws. The fake rental operation was discovered when multiple prospective tenants compared application experiences and discovered they had all applied for identical apartments that weren't actually available, leading to investigation that revealed systematic rental fraud and deposit theft through false property advertising and fraudulent application processes. Our 14th story involves a landlord who was deliberately concealing serious mold problems and health hazards while renting apartments to unsuspecting tenants who were unaware of dangerous living conditions that could cause serious health problems and medical complications. The landlord had been aware of extensive mold contamination and environmental hazards, but had decided to continue renting affected apartments while concealing health risks from prospective tenants who had the right to know about dangerous living conditions and environmental safety concerns. The health hazard concealment scheme involved sophisticated cover-up techniques and false property representation that would hide serious environmental problems while collecting full rental payments from tenants who were unknowingly exposed to dangerous living conditions and health risks that should have been disclosed according to landlord safety obligations. The landlord had been particularly focused on avoiding expensive remediation and property improvement costs by concealing health hazards while maintaining rental income from properties that should have been declared uninhabitable until environmental cleanup and safety improvements could be completed. The scheme extended to manipulating property inspections and health assessments to avoid detection of environmental hazards while creating false property condition reports that would conceal serious health risks and safety violations that endangered tenant health and well-being. The landlord had also been threatening tenants who complained about health problems while refusing to acknowledge environmental hazards and health risks that were causing ongoing medical problems and safety concerns for apartment residents and their families. The health hazard concealment was discovered when multiple tenants experienced serious health problems and environmental testing revealed extensive mold contamination and environmental hazards that had been deliberately concealed while collecting rent from tenants who were unknowingly exposed to dangerous living conditions. Our 15th story comes from building residents who discovered their neighbor was systematically stealing packages and mail from the rental building while operating theft operations that targeted delivery services and postal communications for multiple apartment units and building residents. The neighbor had been monitoring delivery schedules and mail service patterns while conducting systematic theft of packages and correspondence that belonged to other building residents who were unaware that their deliveries and communications were being intercepted and stolen. The package and mail theft scheme involved sophisticated monitoring and timing that would allow systematic theft while avoiding detection through normal building activities and resident routines that should have provided security for deliveries and postal services according to building management and mail service expectations. The neighbor had been particularly focused on stealing valuable packages and important mail while maintaining enough normal building presence to avoid suspicion about their involvement in ongoing theft operations and mail interception that was affecting multiple residents and building units. The scheme extended to recruiting accomplices who could help monitor deliveries and provide additional theft opportunities while sharing proceeds from stolen packages and mail contents that represented significant financial loss and communication disruption for legitimate building residents. The neighbor had also been manipulating building security and access systems to facilitate theft operations while creating false explanations for presence in mail and delivery areas during times when theft activities were occurring and packages were being intercepted. The package and mail theft operation was discovered when multiple residents noticed missing deliveries and surveillance revealed systematic theft by building resident who had been exploiting building access to conduct ongoing mail and package theft operations that affected the entire residential building community. Our 16th story involves a property management company that was systematically charging fake fees and penalties for normal apartment, while inflating damage claims and creating false maintenance requirements that would generate additional revenue through fraudulent fee assessment and penalty charges. The management company had been operating a systematic fee inflation scheme where normal apartment wear and standard maintenance needs would be classified as tenant damage requiring expensive repairs and penalty payments that far exceeded actual property maintenance costs and restoration requirements. The fake fee charging scheme involved sophisticated manipulation of property inspection and damage assessment that would justify excessive charges while avoiding legal liability for fraudulent fee assessment and tenant rights violations that should have protected residents from excessive penalty charges and false damage claims. The company had been particularly focused on targeting tenants during lease transitions and move-out periods when fee disputes would be difficult to resolve and tenants would have limited ability to challenge fraudulent charges and penalty assessments that violated tenant protection laws and fee limitation regulations. The scheme extended to creating relationships with corrupt contractors and service providers who would provide inflated repair estimates and false damage assessments that would support fraudulent fee charges while actually providing minimal property improvements and maintenance services that didn't justify excessive tenant penalty charges. The company had also been manipulating lease terms and fee disclosure to conceal fraudulent charges while creating false legal justifications for penalty assessment and fee collection that violated tenant rights and property management regulations. The fake fee charging operation was discovered when multiple tenants compared fee experiences and legal investigation revealed systematic fraudulent charging and penalty inflation that violated tenant protection laws and property management fee regulations. Our 17th story comes from a landlord who discovered their tenant was refusing to pay rent while claiming tenant rights protections and legal justifications that supposedly allowed rent withholding despite having no legitimate basis for payment refusal and lease obligation avoidance. The tenant had been researching tenant protection laws and legal loopholes while creating false claims about property problems and landlord violations that would allegedly justify rent withholding and lease obligation suspension according to tenant rights regulations and housing protection statutes. The rent refusal scheme involved sophisticated legal manipulation and false property claims that would provide apparent justification for payment avoidance, while actually violating lease obligations and rental agreement terms that required ongoing rent payments regardless of minor property issues and maintenance concerns. The tenant had been particularly focused on exploiting tenant protection laws while creating false emergency situations and property problems that would allegedly justify rent suspension while actually representing normal maintenance needs and minor property issues that didn't qualify for rent withholding protection and payment suspension rights. The scheme extended to threatening legal action and tenant rights violations while actually engaging in lease violations and payment refusal that wasn't protected by legitimate tenant rights laws and housing protection regulations that were being misrepresented and exploited. The tenant had also been recruiting legal assistance and tenant advocacy groups while providing false information about property conditions and landlord behavior that would generate support for unjustified rent withholding and lease violation activities. The rent refusal scheme was discovered when legal investigation revealed that tenant claims about property problems and landlord violations were false, and that rent withholding wasn't justified according to actual tenant protection laws and housing regulations that were being misrepresented to avoid legitimate rental obligations. Our 18th story involves a landlord who was systematically renting uninhabitable apartments while claiming that property conditions met basic housing standards and safety requirements that supposedly justified charging full rental rates for substandard housing that violated health and safety regulations. The landlord had been avoiding expensive property improvements and safety upgrades while continuing to rent apartments that didn't meet basic habitability standards and housing safety requirements that should have prevented rental until property improvements and safety compliance could be achieved. The uninhabitable rental scheme involved systematic concealment of property defects and safety violations while creating false property condition claims that would attract tenants who were unaware of serious housing problems and safety hazards that made apartments unsuitable for residential occupancy. The landlord had been particularly focused on targeting desperate housing seekers who would accept substandard conditions while avoiding housing inspections and safety assessments that would reveal property violations and habitability problems that required expensive repairs and compliance improvements. The scheme extended to manipulating lease terms and condition disclosure to avoid liability for property problems while collecting full rental payments for housing that didn't provide basic safety and habitability standards required for residential rental properties. The landlord had also been threatening tenants who complained about property conditions while refusing to make required improvements and safety repairs that were necessary for basic habitability and residential safety according to housing regulations and tenant protection laws. The uninhabitable rental operation was discovered when housing inspectors found serious safety violations and habitability problems that should have prevented rental until property improvements and safety compliance could be completed according to housing standards and rental property regulations. Our 19th story comes from building residents who discovered maintenance staff were systematically copying apartment keys to create unauthorized access for theft operations and privacy violations that exploited building maintenance privileges and tenant trust and property management security systems. The maintenance workers had been using legitimate key access for property repairs to create duplicate keys that would allow unauthorized apartment entry during times when tenants were away and theft activities could be conducted without immediate detection or tenant awareness. The key copying scheme involved sophisticated duplication techniques and timing that would allow ongoing unauthorized access while maintaining normal maintenance responsibilities and building access privileges that provided cover for theft operations and privacy violations that exploited tenant trust and building security systems. The workers had been particularly focused on targeting apartments with valuable items while using maintenance schedules and tenant absence patterns to ensure that unauthorized entries would occur when theft activities would be unlikely to be discovered during actual stealing operations and property removal activities. The scheme extended to recruiting accomplices among building staff and service providers who could help identify valuable items and provide additional access opportunities while sharing proceeds from stolen property and coordinated theft operations that exploited building maintenance and service provider privileges. The workers had also been manipulating maintenance records and access documentation to conceal unauthorized entries while creating false maintenance justifications for apartment access that actually had nothing to do with legitimate building repair and maintenance responsibilities. The key copying operation was discovered when tenants installed security systems that documented unauthorized entries. An investigation revealed systematic key duplication and theft operations that had been exploiting maintenance access privileges to conduct ongoing property theft and privacy violations. Our 20th story involves a property owner who was systematically avoiding tax obligations through rental income fraud while creating false financial records and property management claims that would conceal actual rental income and property value from tax authorities and regulatory oversight. The owner had been operating multiple rental properties while underreporting income and manipulating property records to avoid tax payments and regulatory compliance that was required for rental property operations and income generation activities. The tax avoidance scheme involved sophisticated financial manipulation and false record keeping that would conceal rental income while creating false property management claims and expense inflation that would minimize tax obligations and regulatory compliance requirements for rental property ownership and management activities. The owner had been particularly focused on cash rental collection and off-books income management while maintaining enough legitimate property records to avoid immediate detection of tax fraud and income concealment that violated tax laws and property ownership obligations. The scheme extended to creating false maintenance expenses and property management costs that would offset reported rental income while actually inflating deductible expenses and reducing tax obligations through fraudulent expense claims and property management manipulation. The owner had also been manipulating property ownership records and rental arrangement documentation to conceal actual property control and income generation while avoiding tax obligations and regulatory oversight that was required for rental property operations. The tax avoidance fraud was discovered when tax authorities investigated income discrepancies and found evidence of systematic rental income concealment and false expense claims that violated tax laws and property ownership reporting requirements. Our 21st story comes from building residents who discovered their neighbor was subletting apartment space to dangerous individuals without proper screening while creating safety hazards and criminal activity that threatened building security and resident safety throughout the entire residential community. The neighbor had been operating unauthorized subletting operations while accepting rental payments from individuals with criminal backgrounds and dangerous behavior patterns who posed serious safety risks to building residents and community security that should have been protected through proper tenant screening and lease compliance. The dangerous subletting scheme involved systematic avoidance of background checks and safety screening while creating overcrowding and security risks that violated building safety regulations and lease occupancy terms that were designed to maintain community safety and residential security for all building residents. The neighbor had been particularly focused on maximizing rental income through unauthorized subletting while ignoring safety screening and criminal background verification that should have protected building residents from dangerous individuals and criminal activity that threatened community security and residential safety. The scheme extended to concealing dangerous subletting arrangements from property management and other residents while creating false occupancy information that would hide safety risks and criminal activity from building oversight and community awareness that was necessary for residential security. The neighbor had also been ignoring complaints about dangerous behavior and criminal activity while refusing to remove dangerous subletters who were creating ongoing safety threats and security concerns for legitimate building residents and their families. The dangerous subletting operation was discovered when criminal activity and safety incidents became obvious to building residents, and investigation revealed unauthorized subletting to dangerous individuals who posed serious security threats and safety risks to the entire residential building community. Our 22nd story involves a landlord who was systematically manipulating lease terms and rental agreements after signing while claiming that contract modifications were necessary for legal compliance and property management requirements that supposedly justified unauthorized changes to rental arrangements and tenant obligations. The landlord had been changing lease terms and rental conditions after tenants had signed agreements while creating false legal justifications and property management explanations that would support contract manipulation and obligation changes that violated tenant rights and rental agreement protections. The lease manipulation scheme involved sophisticated contract alteration and false legal claims that would justify rental term changes while avoiding legal liability for contract violation and tenant rights abuse that should have been protected through lease agreement terms and rental protection laws. The landlord had been particularly focused on increasing rental costs and reducing tenant protections through post-signing contract manipulation while creating false explanations for lease changes that allegedly resulted from legal requirements and property management necessities rather than deliberate contract violation and tenant rights abuse. The scheme extended to manipulating lease renewal processes and rental agreement updates to incorporate unauthorized changes while creating false legal documentation that would support contract modifications and tenant obligation increases that violated original rental agreements and tenant protection rights. The landlord had also been threatening legal action and eviction proceedings against tenants who refused to accept unauthorized lease modifications while claiming legal authority for contract changes that actually violated tenant rights and rental agreement protections. The lease manipulation operation was discovered when multiple tenants compared contract experiences, and legal investigation revealed systematic lease, term manipulation, and unauthorized contract changes that violated tenant protection laws and rental agreement regulations. Our 23rd story comes from prospective tenants who discovered a property management company was accepting bribes and special payments for lease approvals while operating a systematic corruption scheme that gave rental preferences to individuals willing to pay additional fees beyond standard application and deposit requirements. The management company had been operating a lease approval bribery system where rental applications would be prioritized and approved based on willingness to pay unofficial fees and special payments rather than legitimate qualification criteria and standard rental application processes. The bribery scheme involved sophisticated corruption and payment manipulation that would provide rental advantages to individuals willing to participate in illegal payment arrangements while discriminating against legitimate applicants who relied on standard rental processes and qualification criteria for housing access and lease approval. The company had been particularly focused on maximizing revenue through unofficial payment collection while maintaining enough legitimate lease approval activity to avoid immediate detection of corruption and bribery that violated fair housing laws and rental application regulations that were designed to ensure equal access and non-discriminatory housing opportunities. The scheme extended to creating false application requirements and additional fee justifications that would provide cover for bribery collection while actually representing corruption and illegal payment demands that violated rental regulations and fair housing protections. The company had also been manipulating application processes and approval criteria to ensure that bribery payments would be necessary for lease approval, while creating systematic discrimination against applicants who weren't willing or able to participate in illegal payment arrangements. The lease approval bribery operation was discovered when multiple applicants compared approval experiences. An investigation revealed systematic corruption and illegal payment demands that violated fair housing laws and rental application regulations. Our 24th story involves a tenant who was systematically hoarding materials and creating serious health hazards while refusing property maintenance access and creating dangerous living conditions that violated lease terms and building safety regulations throughout the residential property. The tenant had been accumulating excessive materials and creating unsanitary conditions while preventing property management from conducting required safety inspections and maintenance activities that were necessary for building health and safety compliance according to housing regulations and lease obligations. The hoarding health hazard creation involved systematic accumulation of materials and refusal of maintenance access while creating dangerous living conditions that threatened building safety and resident health through fire hazards, pest infestations, and sanitary violations that exceeded normal apartment usage and safety standards. The tenant had been particularly focused on preventing property inspection and maintenance access while creating increasingly dangerous conditions that violated lease terms and building safety regulations that were designed to protect resident health and community safety throughout the residential building. The scheme extended to manipulating tenant rights claims and legal protections to prevent property access while actually creating safety hazards and health violations that weren't protected by legitimate tenant rights and privacy protections that were being misrepresented to avoid safety compliance and maintenance obligations. The tenant had also been threatening legal action against property management while refusing to address health hazards and safety violations that were creating ongoing risks for building residents and community safety that required immediate intervention and remediation. The hoarding health hazard situation was discovered when emergency conditions became obvious to building residents and safety inspection revealed dangerous conditions that required immediate intervention and potential tenant removal to protect building safety and community health. Our 25th story comes from tenants who discovered their landlord was systematically refusing to make required safety repairs while claiming that maintenance costs and repair requirements were too expensive to justify property improvements and safety compliance that was actually required by housing regulations and tenant protection laws. The landlord had been avoiding expensive safety repairs and building maintenance, while continuing to collect full rental payments from tenants who were entitled to safe and habitable housing according to landlord obligations and housing safety standards that required ongoing property maintenance and safety compliance. The safety repair refusal scheme involved systematic maintenance avoidance and false cost claims that would justify repair delays while actually violating landlord obligations and tenant safety rights that required immediate attention and safety compliance according to housing regulations and building safety standards. The landlord had been particularly focused on avoiding expensive structural repairs and safety improvements while maintaining rental income from properties that didn't meet basic safety standards and habitability requirements that should have been maintained through ongoing landlord investment and property maintenance obligations. The scheme extended to manipulating building inspections and safety assessments to avoid detection of safety violations while creating false maintenance schedules that would delay required repairs and safety improvements that were necessary for tenant protection and building safety compliance. The landlord had also been threatening rent increases and lease termination against tenants who complained about safety problems while refusing to acknowledge repair obligations and safety requirements that were mandated by housing regulations and tenant protection laws. The safety repair refusal operation was discovered when building inspectors found serious safety violations and habitability problems that required immediate attention and revealed systematic maintenance avoidance that violated landlord obligations and tenant safety rights. Our 26th story involves a neighbor who was systematically harassing tenants and creating building disturbances in an attempt to force building vacancy and reduce property values for potential acquisition opportunities that would benefit from reduced competition and property value depression. The neighbor had been engaging in ongoing harassment and disturbance activities while targeting building residents with noise complaints, false accusations, and intimidation tactics that were designed to create uncomfortable living conditions and encourage tenant departure from the residential building. The harassment for vacancy scheme involved systematic tenant intimidation and building disturbance while creating false complaints and legal threats that would pressure residents to abandon rental units while avoiding direct legal liability for harassment and tenant rights violations that were being conducted through indirect pressure and community disruption. The neighbor had been particularly focused on targeting stable tenants and building residents who contributed to community stability while creating maximum disruption and discomfort that would encourage voluntary departure and building vacancy that could benefit potential property acquisition and investment opportunities. The scheme extended to recruiting accomplices and coordinating harassment activities that would create community-wide disturbance while avoiding individual responsibility for specific harassment incidents and tenant rights violations that were occurring through coordinated community disruption and intimidation. The neighbor had also been filing false complaints with authorities while creating misleading reports about building problems and tenant behavior that would generate official pressure and investigation that supported harassment objectives and vacancy creation goals. The harassment for vacancy operation was discovered when building residents documented systematic harassment patterns, and investigation revealed coordinated intimidation activities designed to force building vacancy and reduce property values for acquisition opportunities. Our 27th story comes from property owners who discovered their management company was systematically inflating maintenance costs and repair estimates while creating false expense claims that would maximize management fees and contractor kickbacks through fraudulent billing and service cost manipulation. The management company had been operating a maintenance cost inflation scheme where routine repairs and building maintenance would be billed at excessive rates while creating false emergency situations and repair requirements that would justify inflated costs and contractor payments that far exceeded actual maintenance needs and repair expenses. The maintenance cost inflation involved sophisticated billing manipulation and false service claims that would maximize management revenue while providing minimal actual property improvement and maintenance value that was supposedly being provided through expensive contractor services and repair work. The company had been particularly focused on creating emergency repair situations and urgent maintenance needs that would justify expensive contractor services while actually providing minimal property improvement and maintenance value that didn't correspond to inflated billing and service costs that were being charged to property owners. The scheme extended to creating relationships with corrupt contractors who would provide inflated estimates and false repair documentation while sharing kickback payments with management company representatives who were steering property maintenance contracts and repair work to overpriced service providers. The company had also been manipulating property inspection reports and maintenance schedules to justify ongoing expensive repairs while actually providing minimal building improvement and maintenance services that didn't warrant the substantial costs and contractor payments that were being billed to property owners. The maintenance cost inflation was discovered when property owners compared repair bills with actual maintenance needs and discovered systematic cost inflation and false billing that violated management agreements and fiduciary obligations to property owners. Our 28th story involves a tenant who was systematically operating illegal business activities from rental property while violating lease terms and zoning regulations that prohibited commercial operations in residential housing units and building communities. The tenant had been conducting various illegal business operations, including unlicensed services, prohibited sales activities, and commercial operations that created ongoing disturbance and safety concerns for building residents, while violating rental agreements and community regulations that required residential usage and prohibited commercial activities. The illegal business operation involved systematic commercial activity and customer traffic, while creating building disturbance and safety concerns that violated lease terms and building regulations that were designed to maintain residential character and community safety throughout the apartment building and residential neighborhood. The tenant had been particularly focused on maximizing business revenue while concealing commercial operations from property management and building residents who were entitled to residential peace and community safety according to lease agreements and building usage regulations that prohibited commercial activities and business operations. The scheme extended to manipulating apartment access and building usage to accommodate business customers while creating safety hazards and community disturbance that violated building regulations and resident rights to peaceful residential enjoyment and community safety. The tenant had also been threatening other residents who complained about business activities while refusing to acknowledge lease violations and usage restrictions that prohibited commercial operations and business activities in residential housing units and building communities. The illegal business operation was discovered when building residents documented commercial activity and traffic patterns that revealed systematic lease violation and business operation that violated residential usage requirements and community safety regulations. Our 29th story comes from prospective tenants who discovered a landlord was systematically engaging in discriminatory rental practices while refusing housing applications based on protected characteristics and illegal discrimination that violated fair housing laws and equal opportunity regulations. The landlord had been operating systematic discrimination schemes where rental applications would be rejected based on race, religion, family status, and other protected characteristics while creating false qualification requirements and application criteria that would provide cover for illegal discrimination and fair housing violations. The discriminatory rental practice involved sophisticated application manipulation and false qualification claims that would justify rental refusal while actually representing illegal discrimination and equal opportunity violations that were prohibited by fair housing laws and rental protection regulations. The landlord had been particularly focused on maintaining demographic control over rental properties while avoiding obvious discrimination that might trigger immediate fair housing investigation and legal liability for equal opportunity violations and discriminatory rental practices that were being conducted through application manipulation and false qualification requirements. The scheme extended to creating false property availability claims and rental application procedures that would discourage applications from protected groups while maintaining enough legitimate rental activity to avoid immediate detection of systematic discrimination and fair housing violations. The landlord had also been working with discriminatory rental agents and property management services that would help implement discriminatory practices while providing cover for illegal discrimination and equal opportunity violations that were occurring through coordinated rental application manipulation. The discriminatory rental operation was discovered when multiple applicants from protected groups compared rejection experiences and fair housing investigation revealed systematic discrimination and illegal rental practices that violated equal opportunity laws and fair housing regulations. Our 30th story involves a property manager who was systematically stealing appliances and fixtures from rental apartments during tenant absence while claiming that appliance removal and fixture changes were necessary for building maintenance and property improvement that supposedly justified unauthorized property removal and theft. The manager had been using building access and maintenance authority to steal valuable appliances and fixtures while creating false maintenance explanations and property improvement claims that would conceal ongoing theft and unauthorized property removal from rental units and tenant personal property. The appliance theft scheme involved systematic removal of valuable property while creating false maintenance documentation and improvement justifications that would explain missing appliances and fixtures through supposedly legitimate building maintenance and property upgrade activities that were actually theft operations and unauthorized property removal. The manager had been particularly focused on stealing expensive appliances and valuable fixtures that could be resold while maintaining enough legitimate maintenance activity to provide cover for unauthorized property access and theft operations that exploited building management authority and tenant trust in property maintenance services. The scheme extended to manipulating maintenance schedules and tenant absence patterns to ensure that appliance theft would occur when discovery would be delayed and property removal would be unlikely to be immediately detected by apartment residents and building oversight. The manager had also been creating false replacement schedules and maintenance reports that would justify appliance absence while actually providing no replacement services or property improvements that would warrant the removal of valuable appliances and fixtures from tenant rental units. The appliance theft operation was discovered when tenants returned to find missing appliances and investigation revealed systematic theft and unauthorized property removal that had been conducted under false maintenance claims and property improvement justifications. Our 31st story comes from a tenant who was systematically breaking lease terms while threatening legal action and tenant rights violations against landlords who attempted to enforce rental agreements and property usage regulations that were being violated through ongoing lease violations and rental obligation avoidance. The tenant had been violating multiple lease terms, including occupancy limits, property usage restrictions, and rental obligations, while claiming tenant rights protections and legal immunity that supposedly justified lease violation and rental agreement avoidance that actually wasn't protected by legitimate tenant rights laws and housing regulations. The lease breaking with legal threats involved systematic rental agreement violation while creating false legal claims and tenant rights manipulation that would prevent lease enforcement and rental obligation compliance through intimidation and false legal threats that misrepresented tenant protection laws and housing regulations. The tenant had been particularly focused on exploiting tenant protection laws while engaging in lease violations and rental agreement breaches that weren't actually protected by legitimate tenant rights and housing regulations that were being misrepresented to avoid rental obligations and property usage compliance. The scheme extended to recruiting legal assistance and tenant advocacy support while providing false information about landlord behavior and property conditions that would generate support for unjustified lease violations and rental agreement avoidance that actually violated legitimate rental obligations and property usage terms. The tenant had also been threatening discrimination claims and tenant rights lawsuits while actually engaging in behavior that violated lease terms and rental agreements regardless of tenant protection laws and housing regulations that were being exploited to avoid legitimate rental responsibilities. The lease breaking with legal threats was discovered when legal investigation revealed that tenant claims about landlord violations were false, and that lease breaking wasn't protected by legitimate tenant rights laws and housing regulations that were being misrepresented to avoid rental obligations. Our 30-second story involves a landlord who was systematically retaliating against tenant complaints through illegal harassment and lease enforcement manipulation that violated tenant protection laws and retaliation statutes that prohibited landlord revenge and complaint suppression activities. The landlord had been responding to legitimate tenant complaints about property conditions and safety issues through harassment, eviction threats, and lease violation claims that were designed to punish complaint activity and discourage future tenant advocacy and property improvement requests that were protected by tenant rights laws. The illegal retaliation scheme involved systematic harassment and lease manipulation while creating false violation claims and eviction threats that would punish tenant complaint activity while violating retaliation protection laws and tenant rights regulations that prohibited landlord revenge and complaint suppression through harassment and lease enforcement manipulation. The landlord had been particularly focused on targeting tenants who filed complaints with authorities while creating false lease violations and property problems that would justify harassment and eviction proceedings that were actually retaliation for protected complaint activity and tenant advocacy that was legally protected from landlord revenge and suppression. The scheme extended to manipulating building services and property maintenance to create additional hardship for complaining tenants while claiming legitimate property management activities that were actually retaliation and harassment designed to punish complaint activity and discourage future tenant advocacy. The landlord had also been coordinating with property management staff to implement systematic harassment while creating false documentation that would support retaliation activities and harassment that violated tenant protection laws and retaliation statutes. The illegal retaliation operation was discovered when tenant advocacy groups documented harassment patterns and legal investigation revealed systematic retaliation and complaint suppression that violated tenant protection laws and retaliation prohibition statutes. Our 33rd story comes from authorities who discovered a property owner was systematically laundering money through fake rental income while creating false tenant records and rental documentation that would conceal illegal income sources through fictitious property management and rental operation claims. The owner had been operating multiple rental properties while creating false rental income records and tenant documentation that would provide legitimate cover for illegal income sources and money laundering activities that violated financial regulations and anti-money laundering laws. The money laundering scheme involved sophisticated financial manipulation and false rental documentation that would conceal illegal income while creating apparently legitimate property management activities and rental income that would justify substantial cash deposits and financial transactions that actually originated from illegal sources and criminal activities. The owner had been particularly focused on creating comprehensive rental operation documentation while actually generating minimal legitimate rental income that would support the substantial financial activity and cash transactions that were being justified through false property management claims and fictitious rental operations. The scheme extended to creating false tenant leases and rental payment records that would support money laundering activities while providing false documentation for financial institutions and regulatory authorities who were monitoring property income and financial transactions for anti-money laundering compliance and illegal activity detection. The owner had also been manipulating property ownership records and rental operation documentation to support false income claims while actually conducting systematic money laundering through fictitious rental income and property management activities that violated financial regulations and criminal law. The money laundering operation was discovered when financial authorities investigated income sources and discovered false rental documentation and fictitious property operations that were being used to conceal illegal income sources and criminal financial activities. Our 34th story involves a maintenance worker who was systematically damaging property systems to create ongoing repair work while generating continuous employment and service revenue through deliberate property sabotage and maintenance problem creation that violated building safety and service obligations. The worker had been deliberately creating mechanical problems and system failures while maintaining legitimate maintenance responsibilities that would provide cover for sabotage activities and property damage that generated ongoing repair needs and service opportunities that benefited personal employment and contractor revenue. The maintenance sabotage scheme involved systematic property damage and system manipulation while creating false explanations for ongoing maintenance problems and repair requirements that were actually being created through deliberate sabotage and property system interference that violated building safety and maintenance service obligations. The worker had been particularly focused on creating recurring problems that would require ongoing attention while maintaining enough legitimate maintenance activity to avoid immediate detection of sabotage and deliberate property damage that was generating continuous repair work and service revenue through artificial maintenance needs and system problems. The scheme extended to manipulating building systems and creating safety hazards that would require immediate attention while generating emergency repair opportunities and additional service revenue that resulted from deliberate property damage and system sabotage rather than normal maintenance needs and building deterioration. The worker had also been coordinating with accomplices among service providers who would benefit from ongoing repair work while sharing revenue from maintenance contracts and service opportunities that were being generated through systematic property sabotage and deliberate maintenance problem creation. The maintenance sabotage operation was discovered when building systems showed patterns of failure that were inconsistent with normal deterioration, and investigation revealed deliberate damage and system manipulation that was creating artificial maintenance needs and repair requirements. Our final story comes from rental applicants who discovered a property management scheme involving systematic identity theft through rental applications while using housing applications and credit checks to gather personal information for fraudulent financial activities and identity theft operations that exploited housing seekers and rental application processes. The management operation had been collecting comprehensive personal information through legitimate rental applications while using housing application data for identity theft and financial fraud that had nothing to do with actual rental property management and housing services that were supposedly being provided through rental application processes. The identity theft scheme involved sophisticated personal information collection and financial fraud while maintaining legitimate rental property operations that would provide cover for identity theft activities and personal information exploitation that violated privacy protection laws and consumer fraud regulations. The operation had been particularly focused on targeting desperate housing seekers who would provide comprehensive personal information and financial documentation while actually using rental applications as identity theft opportunities rather than legitimate housing evaluation and rental qualification assessment that was supposedly being provided through application processes. The scheme extended to sharing stolen identity information with criminal networks while operating coordinated identity theft and financial fraud activities that exploited rental application processes and housing market participation for criminal purposes and personal information exploitation. The operation had also been creating false rental opportunities and property management services while actually focusing on identity theft and personal information collection that was being used for ongoing financial fraud and criminal activities that had nothing to do with legitimate rental property management and housing services. The rental application identity theft was discovered when multiple applicants experienced financial fraud and identity theft following rental applications, leading to investigation that revealed systematic personal information exploitation and identity theft operations that were being conducted through fraudulent rental property management and housing application processes. That concludes tonight's collection of 35 stories about rental property horror stories that destroyed trust and turned housing into warfare zones where greed and desperation led to shocking betrayals and illegal schemes. These situations remind us that whether you're a renter or a property owner, protecting yourself requires vigilance, proper documentation, and knowledge of your rights and responsibilities in the complex world of rental housing. Sweet dreams, and I'll see you tomorrow night with more fascinating tales from Reddit.